Hello and welcome to Court Games, a Legend of the Five Rings podcast, funded by the Legend of the Five Rings Discord Patreon.
This podcast will focus on the role-playing game stories and lore for Legend of the Five Rings.
I'm Korvar.
I'm Kikita Kaori, and today we have an overview of the Writ of the Wilds, which has been extremely delayed because my copy was extremely delayed and I didn't want to write one off of a borrowed PDF. So
Yeah.
it's been a while since we've gotten together. So thank you for all the people who are still listening to us after our long Christmas break.
And to be fair, Christmas is it's a whole thing. Christmas and New Year and all that. So
Yes, Hanukkah, and all of the wonderful festivals this time of year, but they are slightly distracting from
they
podcasts.
can be, yeah. Okay, so yes, let's rush into the news we've got because we do have some. There's an interview with Mary Brennan up on the Edge website. She's the author of the upcoming Game of 100 Candles. So there's an interview with her up on the Edge website, and we'll have a link to that in our show notes. So you can go check that out.
As you said, she is coming out with a new book in February called Game of 100 Candles. She's the one who also did Night Parade of 100 Demons and also a large number of the fictions from the FFG RPG. And poignant for our topic today, she also wrote The Eternal Knot. So you can read that. Another of our favorite Aconite authors is Josh Reynolds. A new Daidoji Shin novel called The Three Oaths is coming out from Aconite in July. I believe it is about Daidoji Shin planning a wedding with the lion and,
oh no,
pulling out his interior decorating chops, which sounds probably boring to everyone not playing Crane, but they usually make it pretty exciting.
Honestly, if you have read any of the previous Daidoji Shin novels, you're kind of going, oh, this is going to be a disaster in the most glorious way.
Yes.
And our final piece of news is that there's a new open role-playing Discord server, Tales of Rokugan. Yes, so they're going to be a server entirely dedicated to Legend of the Five Rings themed role-playing. It's going to be providing in-depth storytelling, world building, and is looking to create a successful story for whatever you choose to tell in the world of Rokugan. So they're looking to have continued plots that have lasting effects on their world or their version of Rokugan, and a creative environment for knowledgeable fans and new fans alike. So there is going to be a bit of a process. So that they've got writing samples and stuff, but they plan to be extremely welcoming and to get people up to speed on their writing skills. So we are going to have a link to all of that in our show notes. So if you want to go check those out, you'll be able to.
So, as I said, our main theme today is going to be talking about Writ of the Wilds, which is the most recent splat book for Legend of the Five Rings 5th edition. This is not Adventures in Rokugan from Edge Studios. It is not by Mori Brennan. However, if you read it, a lot of the lore created in this work is based on The Eternal Knot, which was by Maria Brennan, so it's worth calling her out. This one is by Alexis Daikima, who we have interviewed before, who has helped with other books. And she's been helped by Max Brook, Robert Denton, Josiah Duke Harris, J.D. Latteroot, Riley Miller, and Monty Lin. And so they're the ones to credit for this, so we're going to talk about their work. It has an introductory story, which has Kitsuki and a Nagasha helping out miners in a mine. Very nice adventure to start off with. So I liked their chemistry all right. So that was fun.
But they're kind of conflicting and contrasting styles.
Yes.
I thought it was very nice. So section 1 starts off with the Wilds, the secret empire, meaning the empire that a lot of people don't see because it's, covered in forests and up a mountain and all that. So in this book, kind of the wilds tends to be the forests and the mountains. And so that's kind of the focus, which is also kind of what you find in Dragonland. So this isn't technically speaking the Dragon book on its own, but this is the environments that you tend to find in those areas. We have a series of podcasts on environments, so you may want to go check those out for information about all sorts of places, including forests and mountains with forests. But also other places as well.
Yes.
So there's a lot of lore about that, which is really cool. There's stuff about traveling in the wilderness, but there aren't any specific mechanics for that, which has led to a few people kind of complaining.
Yes. So that is something I've noticed in general with kinds of complaints or issues that players and GMs have with role-playing games. We really and just in the way that lore has been presented in all of these books, we find ourselves as players or fans of L5R, really craving specificity. We want to say, okay, what kind of trees are here, or we want mechanics for how to climb a mountain, or we want really specific things, but it's not necessarily in the interest of the writers of the books to get that specific, because they, one, it would mean the books were 1 million pages long, and also because there are different conflicts, and they don't want to necessarily contradict something that has been said before. So if they keep things very broad and general, then they're not going to contradict anything else either. So it's always a balance when you're developing a world. How specific do you get, and how specific do you let the GM get? It would have been nice to have some survival mechanics here. I guess there's so many different kinds of survival circumstances they didn't raise. The other thing is there's not a whole lot new here. So it's not new information. This is all stuff about the world that we knew or guessed if you've been an L5R reader for any length of time. It feels like you know all this, so it's not giving you anything new. That said, it does actually have some new stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is, I think there are two things. One is they have to assume that this might be the first Splat book a particular player has ever gotten their hands on. Mm-hmm. So it's possible that there are people who've got the core book and this book and nothing else. And that has been a consistent design philosophy for the whole line. And that does lead to some situations where stuff seems to be repeated, or there's, why are we getting this stuff when we've got it in a previous book? It's because they can't assume everyone's read a previous book. Mm-hmm. That's got its benefits and its pros and its cons, basically. And the other thing is you have to worry about how much extra crunch new survival mechanics might add. And that is an issue, because a lot of people think the game is already pretty crunchy. And do you want to add more? And how much does that add versus how much does it slow things down? And that's, they've come down on the side of let's keep things open and not add new mechanics. But that's not going to be everybody's taste.
Absolutely. So just things to think about when you're looking at these books. That said, they do actually, I enjoyed this book a lot, and it felt like it did add new things for me to think about or add. One of those new things, I think the first one we run into, is the concept of Hitsu, which is this compulsion that the wilderness seems to afflict upon mortals. So each realm, like Ningendo or Jikoku or Sakaku or any of those realms, have their own influence that they inflict on people who are closely associated with it. Like an area around an outlet to Jikoku is going to bring out, highlight, create dark evil impulses and compulsions and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Now, much of the wilderness is associated with other realms too, or has portals to other realms, or places where the boundary between the realms is thin. And in those areas, that can afflict people in those areas with the strange compulsions of the realm that is kind of bordering it. And they call that Hitsu. So you might, do bizarre things, or, have an animalistic tendency or something like that comes out. So I thought that was an interesting concept. There's only a sidebar. All the cool stuff is in sidebars. So,
As is always. There was also some stuff on elemental imbalances. It's more about individual elemental imbalances, not the elemental imbalance that was an ongoing plot thread in the wider story, which is the thing that the Phoenix were worried about.
Right. It does give a bunch of theories as to why the elements are becoming more imbalanced in the Empire, which is the broader thing. But it doesn't say it is definitively this one or anything like that. Yes.
So that's, but it does have some stuff on what kind of things you'll find and how this might affect you. I think there's some stuff in there. There's certainly some stuff in there that could make plots.
Absolutely.
And you could spin stuff off from that. So I really like that section quite a lot.
Mm-hmm. There's a section talking about how the various clans relate to the supernatural. I was not keen on this section overall because they all seem to have the same net effect, which is just every clan generally treats the supernatural with wary respect, except for the crab maybe, and they just smash it because they are crab.
They smash it warily and respectfully. Well, that's not true. I mean, yeah, there is a tendency, like, understandably, from where they're from, anything that's weird is a 90% chance of being a Shadowlands horror. So I kind of get their approach, even though it's not necessarily optimal in the Shinomen, for example.
The net effect of all of the descriptions is that all the clans basically treat with the supernatural the same, which I wasn't keen on. I thought that they could have more specific interactions. Like, for example, there's a long relationship in the storyline between the Crane and the Tengu from the beginning of the Empire, and the Tengu supposedly trained Kakita, and they keep coming back and between those two. And there's a pretty long relationship actually between the Scorpion and the Kitsune. They don't talk about any of that in there at all. It's just... Yeah,
and they certainly didn't talk about the relationship between the lion and the Zokujin, which was not a good one.
Right, or anything like that.
It was not a good one.
It wasn't a good one. But even if they don't have any Zokujin in there, so, But even the lion and yokai, considering their relationship with the ancestors, would have been good to say, and they didn't say anything of it. It's just like everybody treats the supernatural with wary respect. And that just, it's like, okay, that's not very flavorful. But that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, it might have been interesting if the Scorpion really don't like the supernatural, and they try to deal with it as little as possible, precisely because they are all about humans and largely how terrible humans are. And that's why they have to be, that's how they have to be how they are. Right. That's why the Scorpion are what they're like. They think people have to be forced to do the right thing. And so, yokai are this weird random element they just hate dealing with. And you could have that as an interesting concept.
Right. Or, well, traditionally, by traditionally, I mean like pre-5e, mostly lore, the Scorpion are actually particularly superstitious. Because they are legalist, they believe everything should follow strict rules. And if they don't, they should be forced to follow strict rules. But it's the legalist way of thinking.
Yeah.
So they are more likely to do things that the other clans would consider superstitious, like never go out of the house with 3 people together, or, because if the universe is following the rules, then you'll be safe, but the universe is out to get you, so you need to follow the rules or bad things will happen. That's a very legalist way of looking at it. Whereas in my thinking of another thing that would be interesting is like the Crane, because Crane fan, is that the Crane are very not superstitious, or the opposite of it, as in, we don't really believe this whole Shadowlands thing exists. Or this whole, we don't believe that this was caused by yokai. This is something that the Crane can frequently believe because they're so civilized in such civilized lands, and they're so far away from the wilderness that they create a world around themselves that doesn't have a lot of this spiritual influence in most people's common lives, and therefore they can be very not superstitious. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And you could then the dragon, as yet another idea, could be very accepting.
Yes, very accepting, but definitely believing in it. They're not agnostics, or they know it's there. It's just more a part of their lives, and they tend to think of it in a more scientific, classifying, breaking down way, or
possibly more of a, in the same way that there's a mountain there and there's a tree there, there's a fox spirit there, and that's just part of the way the universe is, and that's all fine. Whereas the Gasha would definitely be, we're going to have to write. We looked at our Yokai Spotters book, and we're going to write down everyone we find, and we're going to categorize them. But others might just be, they're just part of the world. Why would you treat them anything differently? And that could be an interesting way of having them all be slightly different in their approach to the supernatural. But anyway, there's some good adventure seeds there for the elemental imbalance. I liked those. And I thought that they were good launching points for full adventures, new adventures for... there's a later section talking about elemental imbalance as adventure engine. So we'll talk about that later. There's some discussion on the various different forests that there are. Shinomen Mori is obviously the big one, literally and figuratively. It is when people think of a supernatural forest or even a big forest, we all think of the Shinomen Mori. So there's some detail there. We get to learn about the Tattered Ear Nezumi, who are very similar to the Shadowlands Nezumi, but they've got their own separate kind of culture going on in the Shinomen Mori. And then there's quite a lot of stuff on the Naga, the Shinomen Naga, I should say these days, because the Ivory Kingdoms have their own Naga.
Yes. I really liked this lore section on the Naga. This was all very new, much more in-depth than maybe anything we've gotten regarding Naga before, even in the original 1E Naga splat books. So even, a lot more about their culture. It's slightly different, but I thought it was very, very in-depth for anyone who wanted to play a Naga or just interact with the Naga. It's not long, it's just detailed.
Yeah.
Right? So
I think, I like that section a lot.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. The Shinomen Mori section in general, from the geography part of it and the underground rivers and all of that, they took their time. They looked at their own maps. They looked at D.G. Latteroot's crab novella, and they pulled it in there. I suspect Latteroot wrote this section because the Tattered Inazumi is straight from the same book. So I thought it was really, really a good section. So kudos on it. The next section, the next forest they talk about was the Isawa Mori. And unlike the Shinomen, this doesn't have very, very much there. And I was a little off for me. They talk about the foresters tending the trees, But this is a section which are new. The Asawa Foresters are new, but they didn't say how they tended the trees very well in my reading of it. And I just I don't know. I wanted more here. I wanted stories about, the kind of stories that come out of this place or something. I just didn't feel like, I can sit down and write a game or make an adventure in this Asawa Mori and have anything to.
Yeah. I mean, the Asawa Mori is more managed than the Shinomen, but it is magical in its own way and in a distinct way, which would have been nice to really get across in this section. But yeah. Then we start looking at the northern border, which is mountains and forests. There are a few specific locations mentioned.
Yeah, I liked those locations. They were really good.
Sachioko Tower, Yobanjin Mura, and Wrath of the Kami, which is the big Mount Doom slash Fujisan-ish. It's the closest we've got to Mount Fuji. Because in the Dragonlands, apparently, largely you can always see the Wrath of the Kami mountain somewhere. Mm-hmm. So I can only assume that in the Dragonlands there is a 100 views of the Wrath of the Kami mountain ukiyo-e set. Yobanjin Mura is where there's an interaction between the Yobanjin and everyone else. All on the hush-hush. Never happens. I don't know what you mean. But look at this nice stuff I got from somewhere. I'm not telling you where. But isn't it lovely and interesting?
Sachioko Tower is like the furthest northernmost point of the empire. And it's, has a nice little lore about why it was created. And it's an interesting location, a very, very isolated place where I could see your party being who really, really screws up badly, like execution badly, saying you are going to go be sent to man Sachioko Tower. And then lots of interesting things happen to you because you're out so alone. So I did like that.
It was, if there's a shining center to the galaxy, this is the place that it's furthest from, I believe is the phrase. And I mean, I think I really like those little sections. Each of them seem to be sparking off ideas, which I thought was cool.
The next section is the Yobanjin section. And they start things off and have in a couple of places in this section a very interesting sidebar on imperialism and playing as the imperialists and as an oppressed people in games. So this is a complicated issue with L5R because when you are playing an Asian game in Europe, especially a Japanese-based Asian game like Legend of the Five Rings, you have two kinds of complications because Asians in the West have at various times, including the Japanese, been a persecuted minority and continue to suffer different kinds of discrimination, to this day. On the other hand, the Japanese in particular have been very oppressive conquerors. And then you take this into of other nations in the world. Then you take this into your fantasy world, and now you've got people playing samurai, where it is a conquering, warlike culture. And then there are the people that they conquered. So how do you deal with those power dynamics? And we always say these are good topics to talk about at your table and think about when you're going to be dealing with it. It's just respectful to, if not exclude the topics, unless you really feel saying you can have the topics. You can just discuss what does this mean and what are you talking about and think about it because it's a world. So I recommend trying not to force your players into one set of actions or another. don't force your players to be bastards. Even if even if imperialism is terrible, don't force your players to be bastards if they don't want to.
Yeah.
That's my general recommendation for all of it. Anyway, it's a good discussion.
Yeah. The one thing I did like about this discussion about the Yobanjin, I mean, I thought the imperialist sidebar was very, very good. But a little trivial thing that I liked was we finally get at least an explanation for what Yobanjin actually means. I think actually originally it was meant to be something else, but and like the syllables were wrong. This is like in the AEG times. But essentially it means the 40,000 people, which is kind of one of those things like we talk about this. It's a random number that is essentially now associated with the number of people who didn't want to be part of Rokugan when the Kami started, putting together what is now Rokugan. So it is just this number that is now associated. And so now Yobanjin means specifically those people who weren't part of it, however many there were originally. That's kind of the number that has got attached to it. And so that's now what they get called. So
that was cool. Yeah, they had good origins in general. Makes sense.
So we get 3 Yobanjin groups detailed. One of them I actually kind of thought was a bit odd because I'm reading through this. It's a very detailed description of the Hyoketsu tribe. But the problem is the Hyoketsu are the ones who become the Kaito, which means that this is literally, you're reading through this thing, this very detailed description of people who no longer exist in the game. And I was a little confused by that, how much of the page count was like, literally, these people don't exist anymore. I would obviously, the obvious thing is, hey, there just happens to be a group that is exactly like this. Or the Kaito didn't come from the Hyoketsu, they came from a different group. Very, very much like the Hyoketsu.
Or you're playing a game set in the past.
Yes, that would be another thought. But it seemed an odd choice.
It was an odd choice, but I figured it was a model tribe.
I think that would have been better, but they could have done it with a tribe that actually in game still exists. It's just that's the thing that gets me. But it is nice and detailed, and you can absolutely use those as a model for similar peoples. It's just odd that they chose that group that specifically does not exist anymore. But other than that, I really like that section.
Well, so far for all of these, they've definitely drawn deeply on the content of the novellas. So as their inspiration. So you can definitely tell that. So that's all the Haikatsu stuff was from Sword in the Spirits, which is the Phoenix Clan novella by Robert Denton. So I think this probably was written by Robert Denton, I guess. I don't know for sure. But I think he was expanding on the stuff he had already created, and that's why they used that particular one. And if you were to dig into the roots of the Kaito or doing something that was deeply twined up in the Kaito family, then you could use this stuff as like your lore background and have things coming out of it to inspire your adventures. Another of the Yobanjin tribes were the Kogarashi and the Woolen Hooves, which was a broader, pretty peaceful Yobanjin group. They have close ties with the unicorn, and how they originated was different than some of the other more conflict-associated Yobanjin. So I like this one. I think if I were going to model new Yobanjin groups, I would model it off the Kogarashi. Or if I was going to say, okay, you meet a Yobanjin on the wilderness, I'd probably tap this one as being my source information and just have them scattered because they're nomadic anyway. It works.
And the final group were the Seikitsu, who live, and this, what I liked about this is I did not, when they kind of said they live here, I kind of went, oh, I'd never considered that. But as soon as they can mention it, it does make sense. They live actually in the interior of Rokugan. They live in the spine of the world's mountains. which I thought was a really cool thing. That, in this, because this mountain range, which you can really only get through in large numbers through Baden Pass, there are people who live there, and Rokugan as a whole doesn't know about them. And I thought that was rather cool. They congregate around Tengu's Overlook, so they got some links between them and the Tengu, which I thought was cool. I was curious, and so I did a bit of, I say research. The word research would be doing a lot of heavy lifting. I did, but there were some nomadic and semi-nomadic mountain people in historical Japan called Sanka. There's various different names, but there are mountain people. It kind of has a bit of a derogatory meaning these days. I think it's kind of similar to hillbilly, that kind of thing. But so there's historical kind of parallels you can make. Probably if I had to complain, and obviously I have to because I'm a nerd and we all feel the need. There is a mention of an actual straight up city of the sea, Hitsu, and I don't feel that it's likely that could be supported in a mountain range and would be hidden. That seems unlikely to me, but your mileage may vary.
Now, it's important to remember this discussion did come up online, like what's a city?
What is a city exactly, yeah?
Per the definitions used in the Emerald Empire sourcebook for 5e, a city is 10,000 people in L5R. So it's not the, 250,000 or 1 million people that we might think of as a city. It's smaller than that.
But the logistics of supporting, because that's 50,000 people outside that city supplying it with food, give or take. That's a lot. And, that's a lot of farming, and that's difficult to, they're supposed to be semi-nomadic. I mean, your ones, and they're an interesting folk. And I don't think saying they only have towns and villages takes anything away from them. I think the Seikutsu are an interesting addition.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm just being picky about, I don't think there'd be a straight up city. That's it. But other than that, I think they're an interesting addition, and I think they're really cool.
So that kind of, was the first section of section 1. Quite a bit of new lore there, which I appreciated. Now we'll go to the second section, which is talking about the Dragon Clan. And first thing I noticed about the Dragon Clan is that it's got the ink splot style mons that they've had for the clans in a lot of the L5R material. They had ink splot style mons for the different families of the dragon. I don't remember those in any of the other books. I could be wrong, but I don't think I saw them. And the thing I like about them is that the dragon mons notoriously are extremely unlike the mons for the other families and the other styles of Rokugan. The dragon style mons are just very different looking in the oldest family mon art. And I haven't seen a lot of art of mons since. So I really liked new mons for them. They're still the same thing, but there's a founding story, which is the same as we've had in L5R. We've talked about it in our dragon episode. There is no mention of any of the Adventures in Rokugan style changes that had been potentially made to the dragon about Fulang and Togashi having a different father and the lands outside the empire and all of that. No, none of that in this book. So this is just classic L5R dragon founding. So
yep,
that's good.
We have a map as is traditional. And also as is traditional, it's very pretty looking. I do like it. Lots of locations. It seems almost half label.
Yeah, that format is a little difficult.
Yeah. There is an awful lot of these of locations, which is really nice. So maybe you almost wish you could have that for other maps.
I was jealous. There was enough locations to really do a lot of stuff, and they were described in the text, and it's just like, I wish the other clans who had Splat books out before this had that many locations on their map that were actually part of their own lands, and the other clans.
Yeah, I do find myself penned out because we had a big discussion recently about Fields of Victory and Courts of Stone and the way their maps disagreed very strongly. And I don't know if there's anything like that going on here, but it's a nice looking map.
I haven't broken it down, but since all of this was up in Dragonlands and has nothing on the rest of the map, so like Courts of Stone had the Deer Clan, which wasn't even in Cranelands, and is at the same location as a Lionland location. And it's like, that's the conflict there. But these were all in Dragonlands. There were many small locations, and they weren't scattered. So you're less likely to have conflict with existing stuff. There's just so much new. So I will eventually get to putting it on the general map, but I was a little jealous, I admit. Anyway.
Yeah, so there you go. That's that.
It has a breakdown of the stories for each of the families. Pretty much what was familiar before. So we've talked about all this in the Dragon episode, so we won't talk about it again. The big change here was the change to the Togashi family, which follows the lore from the Eternal Knot and from the other 5e short stories that came out in the association with the card game. So this has, instead of Togashi being Togashi Yukuni, the visible leader of the Dragon Clan, Togashi, the Kami Togashi, is the tattoo master and has been hiding in the back, and it talks about many things that were in those fictions. So this is new for 5e. They aren't from old lore, but it's written up well here, and I liked those changes in general to the lore. So and the whole people coming to be Togashi, following their past lives, all of that. I appreciate L5R lore, and I know a lot of the old stuff, but one of the things I really enjoy in the 5e and get disappointed when I don't see it is where things have changed. So one of my disappointments, I think, for like all the Crane stuff, just in 5e in general, is there's nothing new there, at all for it. No, there's been no change, no new locations, nothing new, and it's like this Togashi stuff, this is creative, and I like it. So I'm glad to see it written up.
Yeah. I mean, this might be new for people who have not read The Eternal Knot. I don't know how much of this is in the standard, in the core book.
None of this is in the core book, really. It's in some of the later Battles of Cherry Blossom Snow, some of the later fiction. You learn some of this stuff, So
if you haven't read that, and not everyone has, then this is going to be new stuff. So I think that's nice to have all that in one place now. So, yeah. So obviously we have Togashi family, or the order, the Togashi order. You got the Agasha family, Kitsuki and Muramoto. They all get their write-ups, and a nice new Mon, which is cool, and lots of locations within their lands themselves, which I think is something you really want if you're going to be spending time in Dragonlands. You want places to go and interesting reasons to be there. So that's, I think, I really like that section for that. The next section is on temples, kind of in general, but obviously temples are kind of associated with the Togashi and the dragon. So there's a lot of information about those temples. So you have the World Temple, which is an interesting idea. It's more of a philosophy, as in the world itself is your temple, which I thought was that. So there's lots of fun. This is a philosophy that people you might meet, and indeed your characters might have, that everywhere is a temple. The natural world is your temple, essentially, which was a fun little write-up.
And then there's the Wrath of the Kami, which we talked about before as a temple, and other strong temples. I find temples to be more unique than Kyuden's in general, or at least the way these were written up were. So I appreciated that. There is a full write-up with a map of the Mountain Song Temple, kind of like there was a write-up of the Yokota War College and Fields of Victory. Not quite as much as in there, but it still appreciated that as a solid temple location.
There was one quibble I had about this kind of section, and that is that how many Togashi-run temples there were, which seemed a bit odd to me because I never felt there were that many Togashi. There was enough to be in the High House of Light and a few people wandering around and not entire full temples. But that's maybe just my view of the Togashi, which might not be everybody's view. You could easily swap them out for Brotherhood if you want to.
I guess I never thought of them as being purely Togashi temples, because I think of Togashi more as wandering around. I think these are a lot Agasha temples.
Yeah, but one or two did seem to be, this is a Togashi-run place, but yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, a quibble, really, from my point of view.
Okay. Well, so I think that's the finish of section 1, and I think that we should wrap this up and take a crack at section 2 for our next episode. How's that sound?
Yeah, for our next episode. That sounds good to me.
So just to give a call out to Fortune and Strife, our affiliated actual play podcast, that's producing new episodes, maybe even more regularly than we are, as well as our friends at D20 Radio. And we wanted to give a shout out to our Patreons. Our content is funded by our community Discord Patreon. It supports our editing costs, as well as the website and the Discord that we have. It has special bonus contents like Adventure Seeds, early access to our AP podcasts, and really whatever we can think of for them.
Online, you can find us at our website, courtgamespod.com. On Twitter, we are twitter.com/courtgamespod. And if you want to support us, you can find our Patreon at patreon.com/courtgames.
Yes. That's it for this episode, but we'll be back talking about more Writ in the Wilds. We're just incredibly verbose. This is Kikita Kaori. May the fortunes favor you.
And I have been Korvar, and until we meet again, keep your jade handy.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.